Hello everyone, my name is Dennis Porter here with version 4.0 of the Material Manager plugin. There have been a lot of new features since version 3 that I'm excited to talk about, but first let's go over how to install the plugin. Alright, so in your zip file you're going to have 4 entries. You're going to have a directory which contains all of the icons. You're going to have 2 mel files, and then you're going to have a text file. The text file also contains instructions on how to install this plugin. So once you have your zip open, you're going to find the directory for Maya. So we're going to go to C:users, whichever account you use. I'm Dennis. I'm going to go to My Documents, and then the Maya directory, and then whichever version of Maya you're on. I'm under 2016 extension 2. And then we're going to go to the prefs folder, and then inside the scripts folder, you're going to want to export those 2 mel files in here. And then we're going to back up, and under the icons folder, you're going to want to make sure the Material Manager folder that has all the icons is under the icons directory. So once you've done this, you'll want to go to Maya. You'll want to restart it. If Maya was open when you pasted the stuff in there, you'll need to close it and reopen it. Next, in the mel command line, we're going to type source space dp underscore capital material capital manager dot mel semicolon space, and then lowercase material uppercase manager semicolon, and then we're going to hit enter, and the window should pop up. One more quick thing before we get into going over the Material Manager. The mel file itself has been set up so you can customize the default settings of the Material Manager. At the very top of the file, there's a number of variables here that you can adjust, which will customize which features are on or off when you run the Material Manager. Each variable has a description of what it does, as well as a note of its original setting in case you want to go back and reset to the default settings. So let me quickly go over the main interface here. Up at the top we have the menu bar. We have the tools menu, which has some quick tools for opening the hypershade and running the smart exporter. More on that later. And then running some of the other tools that are also found down here at the bottom. There's also options to set hotkeys for the 2 tools, as well as create shelf buttons for those as well. I would recommend after running the Material Manager for the first time, you come up to the tools options and create a shelf button right away. That way you always have access to the tool without having to type in the mel command every time. Next we have sorting menu, which will change how the materials display in the list. We have some cleanup tools where we can clean up unused materials, utilities, and file nodes. We can also purge the scene, relate names, and relate shading engine names, and I'll talk about that more later. We have some new bonus settings where we can hide or reveal the banner section in case you need more real estate. We have some settings for some new features that I'll talk about later. We have an option to include now the particle cloud object in the material list, and we have the ability now to change the nameplate size a little bit. So we're going to drop this down, or we can bring it up much larger. I'm going to keep this though at the default size of 30, and I'm also going to hide that particle cloud. There we go. We now have dock options, so we can now dock the window left and right, as well as switch back to a floating window whenever we want. This was one of the most requested features, and I'm glad I finally was able to get it in without any bugs. For the majority of this video though, we're going to keep the window floating. And finally we have the help menu that has version information, a link to this video, and just other information on how to contact me for comments, critiques, bug reports, and things like that. Next down we've got an import button. That's basically just the same as the import button here. It's just a little bit more convenient. We have the smart export tool here, which we'll talk about later. I'll actually talk about this in a separate video. Coming on down, we've got the search bar, which works in the current scene and the presets tab. Next we've got the 3 tabs. We've got the scene listing of existing materials. We have presets, and then we've got a new tab for a greatly improved color ID map Baker. Back on tab 1, we've got the main list here where all the materials will populate. Down here we have quick materials of a Lambert, a Blinn, a checker, and then the custom, just picking your own material out of the list. Refresh button, and then we've got some buttons here for marked materials, which I'll talk about later. Down here we have a few new tools, which I'll talk about in a minute or two, as well as the standard channel control assign, delete, texture file buttons. Before we get into talking about the contents of the first tab or the ID map baker, we're going to actually talk about the presets tab. This tab contains numerous material presets that don't yet exist in the scene. If we go to our hypershade, we can see that we just have the Lambert, the particle cloud, and then the shader glow. These don't actually exist. If we were to grab our object here and assign a material, you can see now that when we click on the nameplate, the object is then created in the scene itself. This allows you to only click on the nameplates that you need instead of loading in every single material. It'll help keep your scene relatively clean. The search bar up here will now work in the presets tab, so if we do a search for metal, hit enter, it's going to filter that list. And our search bar turns yellow to indicate that we have a filter in effect. If we want to clear the filter, we just click on the little dash next to the text box, and that'll reset everything. So I'm going to load in a bunch of base colors to the scene. You can see here that they're not assigning to the object. They are loading into the scene. You can see here in the list now. Go ahead and close the hypershade. And I'm actually going to change the nameplate size down to 20, just so I can cram them all into one shot. Alright, so next we have the current scene tab here. The main interface for the material list has changed a little bit. You no longer have indicator arrows to tell you what is assigned to your object. Instead, the nameplate will change color. So if you select your object, the nameplate will highlight for which one is actually assigned to your object. To assign a new material, you have these colored thumbnails which reflect the actual color of the material itself. That's what you will click on to assign that material to your selection. So it kind of doubles as a visual preview of the color of the material as well as the assign button. And the empty checkboxes here are how you now mark materials. So I can grab all these and I can say delete. Or I can grab these three and I can say rename. So I'll just rename this black, orange, purple. And with the renaming tool, so with the rename tool, I can actually ignore underscores, just add a space, and any spaces or other invalid characters will automatically be converted to underscores. So I'll just call this orange. So I added an underscore there, but whatever. And then solid purple. So you can see those underscores were added. Marking is easy. You just click the box to check or uncheck. If you have a bunch marked, you can hold Control and click any box and it'll clear your selection. So let's go ahead and we're going to actually use the cleanup and purge scene. There we go. Another feature I've implemented is assigning materials to instances. So let's make a couple of instance objects here. You can see here that these three models are instanced. And the default behavior of Maya is to only assign a material to one object. So if I assigned a Lambert to this object, these would retain their current materials. Now if you assign through the material manager, it's going to propagate through all of the instances. So if we assign a black, it's going to assign black to all of the instance objects. So let's switch to a Lambert. If you don't want your material assignments to affect instances, you can change this in the bonus settings menu. Just turn off apply assign materials to instances, and now we can individually assign materials again. This feature also works across subcomponents as well. So if I switch to face mode and I select a number of faces and I assign a new material, it will be sent through to all of the instances. Next, I'm going to use the quick materials here to check my textile density and assign a new material. So we're going to hide this high poly bring out the low poly. So now I'm going to assign this quick checker material. We can see here that it's already been named correctly, so we know what it is. And if we check our hypershade, so let's go to open this, we can see here that the entire hierarchy of the material is actually named correctly. So this is the material, this is the checker pattern itself, this is the place 2D texture, and then this over here is the shading engine. So they're all labeled as the checker, so there's no mistaking what it is in the scene. And if I were to delete this material, everything would go with it. So if I check this and I hit delete, it's all gone. All the utilities and everything is gone. This will be more important later when you're working with multiple materials with multiple texture files. We'll get back to that. Let's see. So for now, let's go ahead and reassign that checker. Go to viewport 2, check our density, looks good. And now we're going to make a new material to assign our texture files. So I'm just going to click the blend. We're going to get a prompt for naming the material. So I'm just going to call this M Vortex Ranger. And again, it's I'm skipping that underscore because it's going to add it for me. And I have a couple options here. I can either create it, which will create the material but not assign it to anything, or I can do create and assign. If I press enter after writing the name, the default action is to create and assign it to the selection. So there we go. So now I want to assign texture maps to my material. I'm going to do a diffuse, a normal, and a spec map. First we're going to start with a normal map, so I'm going to click this icon here, and we're going to choose the normal. So before I add the other maps, you'll notice that the normal map doesn't quite show up correctly on the model. And this is where the first tool down here comes into play. This purple hand is actually showing the tangent space coordinate system being used by the model. In Maya, it's called left-handed and right-handed, otherwise known as DirectX and OpenGL. If I click this button, it's going to toggle from right-handed to left-handed, and then you can see now that my normal map will display properly. Now I can go ahead and apply the last textures. So we'll do the spec map, and then the diffuse. There we go. If I needed to remove these textures at any time, I can just click the trash can icon, and that will actually remove the channel. You can see here that they're occupied. If I click the trash can, they become deleted. So I can do Control Z to undo that. If we take a look at this material in the hypershade, this one here, we can actually see that everything is labeled correctly. So these are all the place 2D texture nodes, here, 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 and here. And they're all correctly labeled with Vortex Ranger. It has the name of the material as part of the naming convention, all the way through the entire hierarchy. So if you had to go looking through the hypershade for assets, they're all named properly. You'll never not know what something is. So this next tool here is actually a modified version of a script written by Jonathan Stewart. I've put a link to his script in the description in case you guys want to check it out. Basically what this tool does is it will harden all UV border edges and soften everything else. This is very handy when you're trying to set your mesh up for baking normal maps. So as you can see here, my mesh has been completely hard-edged. If we look at the base model, it's all faceted. And if we look at it with the normal map on, it doesn't really display correctly anymore. So if I select my object and run the tool, it's going to soften everything and then harden at the UV edges. Now my normal map displays correctly again because this is the tool I use to set it up for baking in the first place. Next tool is the Color ID Map Baker. If you click on this, it'll just take you to tab 3. I'll explain this tab a little bit later. And one more thing regarding material channels. Let's say you wanted to apply your ambient occlusion as the diffuse. Let's go ahead and do that. What Maya will sometimes do is it'll think that it has a transparency channel, so it'll assign the texture to the color and the transparency channels, and you'll get like a see-through model. If you just choose this option here down at the bottom, it'll actually separate the transparency away from the material, so it's not see-through anymore. And finally, this last tool is a namespace remover. Let's go ahead and hide this real quick. And we're going to import something that has a namespace. Usually OBJs coming from like ZBrush or Blender will have namespaces attached to them, and sometimes they don't go away when you try and rename. So if you just choose this option here, click the icon, it'll remove that namespace for you. Additionally, you can actually control click on this button and it'll bring up a namespace editor so you can actually see what's going on, and you can delete it from here as well. So that's it for the first tab. We'll go ahead and cover the ID Map Baker next. Next we'll go over the ID Map Baker that's been greatly improved from version 3. This will assign up to 15 different colors. If you have more than 15 elements in your selection, the tool is going to reuse colors. So just keep that in mind. So let's select our high poly, and I'm going to turn off selection highlighting so we can see it. And I'm going to choose the auto assign color ID button, and it's going to warn me that there's more than 15 elements, so it's going to reuse colors. I'm going to choose proceed, and here we have a loading bar, and there we go. So this had 26 elements, all of which have been assigned a random color. So now we're going to go ahead and bake. I'm going to move my low poly and the cage on top of each other. And then through the outliner I'm going to select the high poly. And here I'm going to choose the high poly mesh button, and that's going to load it in. Next I'm going to choose the low poly, click the button, cage, click the button. So now these have all been loaded in. Here I can choose my map size and my file format. Just choose Targa, and texture padding. I'm going to choose a file destination, just call this test bake. And now we can bake. Alright, so we have a success prompt. Hit OK. We'll go ahead and isolate our low poly, and we're going to actually make a material to display our color map. So first I'm going to get rid of all these old materials. I'm going to go up to cleanup, and we're going to just choose purge scene, and that's going to delete all the materials out of the scene. There we go. So now I'm going to create a quick Lambert. I'm just going to hold control and click. I'm going to assign that to the selection, and then I'm going to choose my color map, and we're going to find it here. Open, and there it is. So here's our color map that we just baked out. So that's about it for Material Manager 4. I'm going to cover the Smart Exporter in a separate video. If you have any comments or questions, or if you found a bug that you'd like to report, you can find my contact info in the help menu of the Material Manager itself, and just get in touch with me there. Thanks for watching, guys.